We've all seen those headlines, right? A protest gets heated, a confrontation just completely spirals out of control, and when it's all over and someone's been seriously hurt, the law has to step in and try to figure out what just happened.
And that leads to this huge question. When a whole mob attacks, who's actually responsible? In the middle of all that chaos, how do you point a finger at just one person? Is it just the guy who threw the first punch? Or does everyone in that crowd share some of the blame?
See, this is the fundamental problem the law has to crack. If one person does something wrong, it's pretty straightforward. You can prove they did it. But in a mob of, say, 50 people, good luck proving exactly who did what. It's almost impossible. So how does the legal system get around this?
Well, the law's answer is a really powerful idea called common object. And this concept, it is the absolute key to understanding how a whole group can be held responsible for what just a few of them actually did.
Now, this is a total game changer. Instead of getting bogged down trying to prove individual actions, the law shifts its focus to the group's collective intention. The big question becomes, were you there? And were you on board with the illegal plan? If the answer is yes, then you're legally part of the problem.
To really get our heads around how this works, let's walk through a story. It all kicks off with something pretty simple, a small fight between two students at a college.
So the law student, he feels like he lost face, and he decides to take things up a notch. He gets on the phone, and just like that, this isn't a one-on-one dispute anymore. Oh no, it's now a full-blown confrontation. The whole dynamic has shifted.
And this is where that mob mentality kicks in. 50 people, all showing up with the same goal, that is an incredibly intimidating force. Even if most of them don't lift a finger, just their presence, their numbers, it gives confidence to the few who are aggressive, and it absolutely terrifies their target.
So things get messy, a brawl breaks out, but only 3 students actually throw a punch. So what about the other 47? Are they just innocent spectators who got caught up in the moment, or are they legally on the hook too? The answer is pretty fascinating.
Okay, to answer that, we first have to understand what the law actually considers an unlawful assembly. At what point does a group of people cross that invisible line from just gathering into committing a crime together?
The magic number here is 5. But really, it's not just about how many people there are. What truly matters is their shared intent. A group of 5 or more only becomes unlawful when they're all united by a specific illegal purpose.
And the law is super specific about these illegal goals. It's not just about planning a riot. It could be something like trying to intimidate government officials or actively resisting the police. It could even be something like forcibly taking over a piece of property. If your group shares any one of these goals, you've officially crossed the line.
You can see how the law tries to de-escalate things. The punishments get more severe with every step you take. You go from just being a member of the group, to being armed, to ignoring a police order, all the way to actively rioting. The message is pretty clear. Get out of there before it's too late.
But the biggest, most powerful tool the law has is this idea of shared guilt. This is where it stops being theoretical and gets very, very real for every single person in that crowd.
So think about it like this. The moment you join an unlawful assembly, you kind of stop being just yourself. You become a part of a collective. And in the eyes of the law, that means your legal fate is now completely tied to what that group does.
The fancy legal term for this is constructive liability, and it means the law literally constructs or builds your guilt, not based on what you personally did, but based on the actions of the group that you chose to be a part of.
Okay, so check this out, because shared guilt works in 2 ways. First, if the crime was part of the plan from the get-go, like the plan was to take some land and someone assaults the owner, then everyone is guilty of that assault. But here's the real kicker. Even if a much worse crime wasn't planned, if it was a likely or foreseeable outcome of what you guys were doing, say your goal was to take that plot by any means necessary, well, if one person commits murder, then everyone can be found guilty of murder.
So the rule seems pretty harsh, right? If you're with the mob, you share the blame. But what if you're not exactly with them when the worst stuff goes down?
Let's really push this idea. Imagine one of the members of the mob gets knocked out cold right at the start of the fight. Are they still on the hook for everything that happens while they're unconscious?
Okay, let's jump back to our students. In that first chaotic scuffle, one of the law students gets hit, falls hard, and is completely knocked out. He's just lying on the ground, totally out of it.
And while he's unconscious, the rest of the group seriously hurts the engineering student.
the absolute worst of the violence happens while our one student is completely incapacitated.
And this, right here, is the crucial legal twist. Because he was unconscious, the law says he wasn't a conscious member of that group at the exact moment the serious injury happened. He couldn't share their common object because he wasn't even aware of his surroundings. So for that specific act, he's not liable.
All right, so after diving into the pretty complicated world of mob law, what's the bottom line? Let's quickly recap the main things you really need to remember.
First, that magic number. 5 or more people is where it starts. Second, it's the shared illegal goal, the common object, that really counts, more than what any one person does. Third, remember constructive liability. One person's crime can become everybody's crime. And finally, that little twist? To be guilty, you have to be a conscious participating member when the crime actually goes down.
You know, these laws were written for a time of town squares and street protests. But what does this all mean today in a world of group chats, online forums, and flash mobs? In our digital age, the line between a lawful group and a criminal conspiracy can get incredibly blurry. And that's a really tough question that we're all going to have to think about.